Mr. Chairman, we now have a quorum and you can call the meeting to order.
Okay, is our compatriot back there ready to go? I would call this meeting of Heritage Commission to order. I would ask for a roll call of attendance.
Roll call. All commissioners are here except for Commissioner Bleckley, and Mr. Baff is not here for the opening of the meeting, although he did inform me that he's attempting to get here. But we have a quorum and we can start without him.
And is a notice, a required notice been given for
We have provided the required notice of today's meeting and posted the packet online, so we have jurisdiction to hear this case this afternoon.
Okay. Any questions? Hearing none, let's move on to item number 2.1, the approval of the minutes of the meeting of January 22.
I move we so approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carried. New business, public hearing items. Review of application CA 20-1 filed by Don Mars requesting the approval of a certificate of appropriateness to allow for the demolition and removal of a structure located on the following described property, 342 North Santa Fe Avenue, which is legally described as Lot 23 and the north 24.6 feet of Lot 25 on Santa Fe Avenue, and Lot 24 and the north 24.6 feet of Lot 26 on 5th Street in the original town of, now city of Salina, Salina County, Kansas. This is designated as a heritage conservation property in 1997 due to architectural and historical significance. At this time, I need to inform the commission that I have a conflict of interest in this regard, and I will recuse and turn over the meeting to Mr. Tazikin. Thank you.
Mr. Silverman.
I'm sorry.
I'll leave with you.
Does that leave us with a quorum?
That leaves us with a quorum because as I advised Mr. Reynolds, as long as we open the meeting with a quorum, we cannot lose a quorum from a recusal.
Okay.
So you might want to drop your microphone a little closer to you, and then if you're ready, we will present staff's report on this application, and then we have the applicant's representative here as well. And we'll let okay. So the reason for the special meeting this afternoon is that we have a demolition request for a building that was designated as a conservation property in 1997 due to its architectural or historical significance. I mean, what that means for you as commissioners is a property in Salina that carries that designation means that staff cannot issue a demolition permit for the structure unless an application for a certificate of appropriateness has first been reviewed and approved by the Salina Heritage Commission. And so this particular property is in the 300 block of North Santa Fe, directly north of the former Long MacArthur Ford dealership. The building was constructed in 1924. It was most recently used as a warehouse by Ashby House. And this was identified as a significant architectural resource in the city's historic resources inventory that was conducted in 1985. And the property was likely identified because they found this building was associated with significant historical figures in Salina's history and contained some distinctive architectural characteristics. And I will refer to this as the Rearwin building, as it was the original owner was R.A. Rearwin, and he constructed the building in 1924. So we want to clarify this building is not on the state or national register of historic places. It's not part of a designated historic district like the Santa Fe Historic District, and it's not a local landmark. It would point out that the former Missouri Pacific Depot building that's to the north of this is a designated historic landmark, and that building is currently under renovation. This building adjoins, as I noted, the former Long MacArthur Ford dealership, which is now occupied by OCCK. So several of the things that you are to look at in your review is whether the building still retains architectural integrity. You're to look at the surrounding streetscape and the impact that demolition might have on that. You look at the zoning of the area to see how feasible it is to reuse the building. You are to look at what the applicant's plans are for reuse of the property, and you're also to consider whether the building as it stands the maintenance was willfully neglected by the owner. And so, as we noted, this particular building was built in 1924. The owner was R.A. Rearwin. The building architect was Charles Shaver, who was a prominent local architect and has designed a number of important buildings in Salina. The contractor was Johnson Brothers Construction, and the building was designed to accommodate its first tenant, which was the Lux Mercantile Company, and they were a seller of fresh produce. And there's a newspaper article excerpt that I've provided for you on page 3 that describes the building, but the project architect can get into it in more detail, but this building was specifically designed for rail hub access on the north side so that it had dock-high floors so that rail cars could pick up or pull up next to the building, and then the fresh produce could be unloaded from the rail cars and stored into the building. The information on the building says some features that were unique at the time in 1924 was that this building had extra strength concrete floors, and it had a special refrigeration room, and there was a specially designed room strictly for the storage of bananas. And attached at the end of the report, there is a letter from Mr. Rearwin's son, and in that letter, he describes the history of the building from the family's perspective. So this particular application that we received was filed by Mr. Don Mars, who's the architect for OCCK. The demolition of this building is being requested in order to allow construction of a new replacement building, which will be used by OCCK to store buses and perform maintenance on their bus fleet. The new building will also house a driver break room and restroom, and as you can see, the building adjoins the existing OCCK facility at 340 North Santa Fe. So one of the important aspects of this is that the proposed building will be designed to be a drive-through facility with buses entering on Santa Fe and exiting onto 5th Street. And you have this in your packets, and we'll let the architect go over it in more detail, but this is the floor plan for the building, with this being Santa Fe on the left and 5th Street here, and it's designed to be on one level and to be a drive-through facility. It's not a direct comparison, but if any of you have been to the city's recycling center on North Santa Fe, it would be somewhat similar to that, where it's be designed to enter and be able to drive through on a level surface. The proposal for the building would be to have a 0 setback on Santa Fe that both matches the setback of the building that's there now, as well as the setback of the OCCK building. The building as proposed would be set back 25 feet from 5th Street. As we interpret the plans, the replacement construction would be brick and block, similar to the existing warehouse building. The project architect states that the new brick will match the existing Art Deco style and color of the former dealership to the south. As we look at the justification for the demolition, the applicant states that with the dock-high floors and basement warehouse space, the existing building is no longer usable by its current owner, and that rehabilitation and reuse is not a feasible option. He states that the existing building is beyond its time and applicable space. Therefore, in lieu of rehabilitation and reuse, the architect is proposing compatible new construction. and he believes that the new building will be more usable and enhance the area north of downtown. The current zoning status, although this has similar characteristics to the core downtown with the 0 setback, it's actually has a mix of I-2 and C6 zoning. The existing OCCK facility is zoned C6, and vehicle maintenance facilities are a permitted use, so the proposed use of the property, it is zoned appropriately for that use, just as it was zoned appropriately for the previous warehouse use. So again, on page 5, some of the things that we'll walk you through is a question about whether the demolition is needed to alleviate a threat to public health and safety, whether the architectural integrity of the building is no longer evident, looking at the surrounding streetscape and the context, and whether new construction would negatively affect that, how would it affect buildings in the surrounding area. One of the questions is they're proposing to reuse the building for a bus maintenance facility. Is that compatible with the zoning of the site? Whether the reuse plan is consistent with the city's codes and ordinances for new construction, and whether the building has suffered as willful neglect. And so what we're doing in our staff analysis that we have provided for you is the primary concern, I think, with this building is that it is uniquely designed, and it, in the view of the applicant, it's obsolete and unusable for its intended use. When it was a produce warehouse and when it was directly served by a rail line, all those things were positives for the building, but those same things are negatives for the proposed use by OCCK. And so we don't, from the city's perspective, view this as a demolition that's required to alleviate a threat to public health and safety. This is not a building that's ready to fall down on its neighbors or pose any threat to the public. The Historic Resources Inventory did note that this building has somewhat remarkably, the exterior facade has remained intact and almost unchanged from the time of its original construction. So that exterior portion is still in place. However, it's the interior design and layout that the architect indicates is obsolete and doesn't meet the needs of the current owner. As we look at the surrounding streetscape, you can see that the existing building has a 0 setback on Santa Fe. The proposed replacement construction will match the existing step back, and staff doesn't believe that the replacement construction would negatively affect and could actually, as you look at the images, enhance the streetscape of the 300 block of North Santa Fe.
Do we have any current interior photos? Because obviously we're not voting on.
Well, as I had some interior photos that I had furnished to me from a few years ago from the fire department, but the issue was that the building was so full of furnishings and different things that Ashby House had stored there that you literally couldn't see much of anything that was in the building except for all the things that were stored there. So we don't have any photographs that show you, what it looks like empty. I think we would rely on any information that the architect might be able to give us. I think in your attachments, Mr. Mars, you had a few photographs from the inside. But as we look at having an adverse effect on the conservation district or the remaining buildings, it looks to us like the replacement building would be compatible with the surrounding buildings. And again, we would point out that this is an individual property and it's not part of a larger historic district. The base zoning of the site is compatible with the planned reuse of the property, and the applicant and their architect, Mr. Mars, has met with the city's development review team, and the plan they have has been reviewed for conformance with existing zoning, building code, and accessibility standards. And from what we can tell, all of the plans that have been submitted take into account current building codes, ADA accessibility, and zoning requirements, including building setback, parking, and landscaping. We don't believe that the ongoing maintenance of this building has been neglected by previous owners, and so the need or the desire for the demolition is not related to the fact that the building hasn't been cared for. It's related to the interior layout being obsolete for the proposed use. And so, because the building with its dock-high floors and other things don't meet the functional needs of OCCK, we do believe that without the removal and reuse, it could represent an economic hardship to OCCK's plans to improve and expand their transportation operations at this location if their reconstruction plan is not approved. The other thing we note is that the Heritage Commission does have the authority to ask for a deferral of the demolition and allow for efforts to be made to market the property for sale or lease, or to look for alternative funding sources for renovation. But we don't think that one-year period or any type of period like that to seek a new owner for the building makes any sense in this case when it is right next door to the existing OCCK building, and it's a logical direction for their expansion. It doesn't seem reasonable to staff to expect them to explore alternative uses when the very reason for acquiring the property was that it's adjacent to their existing facility. And so the plan is, if the building is demolished, that there would be an immediate replacement of that building, and that replacement, in staff's view, would appear to be in character with the other buildings in the block. So on page 8, we have outlined 3 potential findings that the Commission could make in support of approving the proposed demolition. And the first one is, although the architectural and structural integrity is intact on this building, it's not feasible to renovate the building to meet the functional needs of OCCK. The proposed replacement construction will enhance the Santa Fe Avenue streetscape and would be compatible with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. And it appears to staff that any delay to the current owner to make an attempt to market the existing building would be an unnecessary hardship, because OCCK owns the adjoining building to the south and wishes to expand its transportation operations. So if you go to page 8 and 9, your options would be to approve the demolition request based on the findings and conclusions that staff noted in the report on page 8, and any supporting information presented at today's hearing by the applicant. You could approve the demolition based on those same findings, subject to any conditions you think are appropriate. You could postpone consideration of this application if you think you need additional information to reach a decision. You could defer demolition for up to a year to allow bona fide efforts to preserve the existing structure to occur. Or you could deny the demolition request upon making findings that the standards for demolition have not been met by the applicant. So if you were to choose to postpone, to defer, or to deny, the property owner could appeal that decision to the City Commission. We believe you should take whatever action is in the public interest and in the interest of the surrounding neighborhood. If you believe that there are some conditions that need to be attached, which would be alternative 2, we would be able to assist the Commission with developing language for any conditions of approval that you think are appropriate. So one that potentially comes to mind would be a fairly standard condition that any replacement construction would conform with the plans presented to you at the meeting today, and any change from that would have to be submitted to staff, and we would determine whether that needed to come back to you for, that it was sufficient change to be reviewed by you. But other than that, we can't think of any conditions that we would have other than that, because this seems to be straightforward, and we have a very good presentation of what is proposed to replace the existing building. So staff would be open to anything that we, questions you have about our packet that we provided. We tried to provide current photographs, proposed elevations. We had a historical photo from the 20s and a letter from Mr. Rearwin's son. And so if there's anything about the packet or the attachments you have questions about, or if there's any particular slide that Dustin presented that you'd like to review again, let us know. If not, we would turn it over to the applicant's representative to make a presentation.
Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Don Mars. I represent DMA Architects, 2035 East Iron here in Salina. I do have some pictures of both the interior and the exterior, if you'd like to pass them around and answer some of your questions. In 1969, when Long MacArthur took over ownership of this building, they used it as a parts warehouse. They created a dock-high platform inside their building and created one single doorway that they had access to the building, and then they used it for parts storage. You can see that the exterior walls of the building are masonry. All of the interior is wood frame construction, wood floor joists, wood columns and beams. They're not heavy timbers. They're multi-width wood that's put together for beams. The roof structure is totally all exposed. It's been that way from it looks like from the beginning of the original construction. You can see there was a kind of a modified freight elevator that was used to move stuff from one floor to the other. That's an open shaft. Parts of the old refrigeration rooms are still there with cork lining and different floor elevations, and so it presents a real challenge as far as using it. When the Ashby House used it, there's a front portion here to the back of the automobile and toward the OCCK, which has a door that looks like it's on street level. And it's this area right here. And if you look in the pictures I gave you, there's one view of that area, and you'll see a single stairway that goes up then to the dock high level of the building. When Ashby House had it, they distributed a lot of food items out of this area. They had furniture storage. They had a lot of different things that people had donated to them, and then they were either selling or recycling them in the community. We looked at the possibility of how could we take the floor structure out of the building and raise the basement floor up and keep the exterior walls. That is not structurally feasible based on how the walls were built and constructed. If we remove that floor system, the exterior walls don't have their adequate bracing to remain. They still doesn't give us the adequate clear height that we need for the bus parking and maintenance and repair. The Long MacArthur building had a access drive which is used by OCCK. There's 3 overhead doors that are on the east side. They currently are maintaining and parking part of their fleet of buses in this building. We will be cutting a door. The proposal was to cut a door into the new building so they can actually bring buses in two different directions and then exit. This room here is the driver's break room, place where they'll have lockers where drivers come before they go out to do their routes. There's bathrooms. There's a tool and equipment storage room for the maintenance and repair portion of the building itself. We tried to create an exterior that both enhanced the Art Deco style of the Long MacArthur building, but still recognized the integrity of what the building was that was there in the past. We're looking at doing a lighter color brick, because if you look at the Long MacArthur building, the base of the building is cast in place concrete, and then they put brick above that. There's a number of brick detail and stucco details on the Art Deco portion of Long MacArthur that we're trying to carry through into this building. The building is somewhat of a triangular shape, with the west wall being from its north-south dimension. You can see here how it's cut off, and that is because there is still a rail spur that is partially remains alongside of here that has not been taken out, which we'll have to deal with during the construction that we're proposing. The dock-high doors that are there, some of the older pictures show that there was a canopy on those, and there was a typical rail dock access point because they were moving freight in and out of rail cars. We just don't do that type of thing today. So the rail siding was no longer there, and it's no longer connectable back.
Do you have to deal with the railroad to take out the
No, we do not.
right of way anymore?
No, the ownership of that does not appear, according to the surveyor, that there's no railroad right-of-way restrictions on the property.
We got lucky.
Yes.
They don't usually give that away or give up. I'm just curious, because it doesn't show, what's the floor-to-ceiling height of the raised, of the main floor?
Of the existing building?
Yeah, the existing building.
You're looking at about 12 to 14 feet, depending on which side you are, because the roof actually has some slope to it.
Right. And what's the height clearance that you need for the buses?
Our proposed building is 24 feet tall. That's going to give us about a 20-foot clearance inside. They do have some lifts that they use to lift the buses to do some of the maintenance on it, oil changes and things like that. So we're needing the height for that.
I'm just wondering, I'm sure, have you considered a ramp to go up and down to the existing floor, or would it?
If we did that,
the
existing wood frame floor is not structurally adequate to support the bus
I
load.
thought it was concrete.
No, the basement floor is concrete. The first floor is wood-framed
Okay.
structure, so it is not structurally sound to support
Sure.
that kind of loads. The other issue that we run into with all the open wood frame construction, today's building codes, we are sprinkling the new building that we're putting in, plus we're sprinkling the old Long MacArthur building, which is the code requirements we have. When you have exposed wood structures, then you've got additional sprinkling requirements that you have to have. If you create an attic space, you have to sprinkle that as well as the other space. So you're getting into some things that just the progression of what the building codes have done have taken buildings like this and made them very challenging to bring them up to code. With this building being the age it is, and with an occupancy change, or even without an occupancy change, you're going to be required to meet the building code requirements if you put a new occupant in the building.
So that opening, the opening that's there now, looks like the door that you're proposing in the replacement, is that an attic? Could you go back to
The
the facade? Yeah. Is that a garage?
This was never a garage door. This was a storefront.
Okay.
In the pictures that were included in your packet that with the letter from the Sun, there was one picture you can see. There's some trucks in the way, but it was a typical storefront that you would have with a clear story above the doors, and this probably was a glass storefront at that particular time. The other door that's on the front here, you come in to a landing and then you go up the 4 or 5 steps to get to the dock-high portion of the building.
Have you considered trying to just save the facade of the building?
We looked at that, as I mentioned earlier, and because of the way it's constructed, it's not feasible to tear the building down and try to retain that while you backfill and then we're still dealing with the cutoff portion of the building from the rail spur. We feel that respecting the past and trying to put something back that is works with the Long MacArthur design and style will help to enhance the area of the downtown Salina, North Santa Fe. OCCK has obtained a grant from transportation grant to help to fund this project, and if this is not approved, the hardship that puts on that grant will go away. Any other questions?
Anyone else have any questions? Concerns?
I think you already hit on my main two, which was about the integrity of the existing floor and
Yeah.
just interior pictures in general, so we can get a better sense for it and what may or may not work.
And you can't tear down the framework inside and fill the basement to a point where you could pour concrete? on
Not
top?
with all the interior columns that support the roof. I mean, so you've got the
Well,
roof
you're going to build a
that's...
new roof with the new structure, so if you took that roof off, could you?
If it was possible to do that and maintain the front wall, and our structural engineers and evaluation of the soils and what we have to do the backfill, they're saying it does not make, be very challenging to save that facade in.
Well, you would save most of the footprint of the building at 3 walls or 2 walls.
Yeah, but the north wall it's at an angle, and it needs to be moved further north. And the east wall that's there's actually, if you look at this building, this was an addition to it originally. So there's actually 2 buildings here that we're dealing with. And in those pictures, there was a picture of this is a masonry wall that's inside this building. So, and it has several openings in it. And a couple of the refrigeration rooms are right in this area. And again, with all the interior columns, I think there's 2 bays of columns throughout the building, and they're about on a 12 to 14-foot center spacing. So the spacing of all that, even if you were to take all of this out and try to save the facade, that's...
And the and the north wall, I'm still, I know you want to square it off, but how much square footage are you actually gaining by squaring it off?
It's not the square footage that we're gaining, it's the physical size of the buses and the way they enter and how they maneuver. You can see we've extended the angle of these parking spaces as much as we can just because of the length of the buses that we're dealing with to try to make this happen. So this, if we were to cut this square footage off, it would basically eliminate those spaces on that side.
Or maybe one, yeah.
I don't think the existing building is very attractive anyway, so.
Okay, well,
We probably didn't do a good job of combining the two numbers, but the existing warehouse building has a footprint of about 8,600 square feet, and the proposed new building is 16,000. So it's roughly double, and that doubling is mostly the extension going farther to the east.
I understood that. I'm just exploring all, because you're going to have to fill in that basement one way or the other to put a floor in. Are you proposing to tear out all the concrete down there and start from scratch, or?
That, the structure will be taken down, the basement floor will be broken up, and then the backfill will begin on top of that. So we don't have to take it all out, but we have to take the walls down so that we can come back in with a fill material that will be adequate to support the new building.
Why do you have to break it up?
So that you don't create a space where you could trap water. You want to allow groundwater to have its ability to move as it may through the area. So we also want to make sure that we don't have any voids underneath that slab that may cause us some issues. So you go in and in that process you'll find that out.
Yeah. Any other questions or concerns? Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation, and would appreciate your consideration of option 1 today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We ready for a motion?
Do we have anybody else that wants to?
Anybody, yeah, we need to open this up to anybody else from the public that's here that has anything to say or comments or questions. I'm hearing none, so the acting chair is ready for a motion.
I move that we approve the demolition request based on the findings and conclusions noted by staff on page 8 and 9.
I second the motion.
I had one other question. Is it possible to recover any of the brick from this structure? Can any of it be reused for part of this project?
If you could, can you show the north side of the building or the east side? We've got two different kinds of brick on this building. You got the face brick on the west side, and then it extends back down the north side about 20 feet, and then you turn into common brick.
Okay.
And so it may not even be that far. So we're dealing with.
Yeah.
You see there how that
Right.
that exchange.
That's a fairly common.
That the common brick on the sides have no value
Right.
at all. The face brick that's on the front of the building, it just depends on how it comes down, whether they would be physically able to salvage those bricks. Anything that, so I can't tell you today whether that's going to be feasible. I can tell you in construction terms, and there is salvage and reclaiming material, there's a cost to that.
Yes.
And so,
Okay. Just,
And it goes for the same for the wood then too.
okay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Nope. The ayes have it. We're going to adopt,
So they
demolition
have
plan?
not to my knowledge, you've not submitted a demolition permit application.
No.
But what that allows us to do as a staff is to approve the demolition permit because the Heritage Commission has authorized it. So,
We've held off on doing any solicitation for bidding or anything of that sort until after you had your meeting and had your say in what we could do. We felt like that was the appropriate thing to do.
Thank you.
Why don't, make sure staff gets the late attendance of
we've got Mr. Baffa
Mr. Baffa.
is
Yeah.
arriving,
Yes.
and
Sorry I was late.
after
No, it's
we,
okay. I was 5 minutes earlier, but I was late as well, so.
he beat you here, but we called him too, so.
I got chemo brain, though. What's your
That's-
excuse?
So we can
Heat stroke.
call Mr. Reynolds back and let him resume his
Absolutely.
place there, and then we'll go through the rest of our agenda such as it is, but,
Good luck with your project, Mr. Mars.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Chair and members of the commission, we don't have any administrative items to bring before you this evening or any preliminary discussion items. Under unfinished or other business, just wanted to tell you what's happening on a staffing level. The city is on a work share program and reduced work schedule. And as long as we've been on it, I still am struggling to keep track of everyone. But I do know that Mr. Hers, who's here, he only works 24 hours a week. And we have Margie Long here, who has taken Crystal Norris's place and helps us with all of our board and commission meetings. And then Mr. John Berger is on a complete furlough from the city of Salina, so that's why you're seeing me here today. And as a result of those things, the city offices are only open 4 days a week. We're not open for business on Friday. And then the other thing that has occurred is we have gone to the city commission and we have reduced the frequency of meeting schedules. So the City Planning Commission normally meets twice a month. They're going to meet once a month for the rest of the year. The Design Review Board, the Downtown Design Review Boards generally meets twice a month, and they're meeting once a month. Your schedule is not really changing other than you have regular quarterly meetings, and then when we have an application like this, a case of Mr. Mars, then what we do is attempt to contact you and find a suitable date and time to have a special meeting. And so there's still a possibility of a special meeting, and there's a couple things out there that I'm going to try to track down, but I'm not going to rule out that you may not be contacted sometime in July for a special meeting. One of the challenges I'm having is when there's communication from the state Historic Preservation Office, they're sending all their emails and correspondence to Mr. Berger, who's not present to answer or respond to them, and they're not sending any communication to me. So then I have to go and find out. But I think that there is a possibility of two different properties that are perhaps seeking designation for state or national register in order to qualify for historic tax credits. And if that is the case and confirmed by the State Preservation Office, then we will perhaps call a special meeting to review those for your consideration. The other thing I would ask Mr. Tazika about is that there was, before a lot of the lockdowns and shutdowns, was some discussion about a additional sign at the Stiefel Theater, and that was tied in a little bit with the tax credits that were being used by the theater, and so we were kind of waiting to hear from the State Preservation Office about how that related to your tax credits. Are you aware of any communication you've received from the state about your marquee
I'm not
sign?
aware of any, the Stiefel was basically holding off on the signage and so forth for the outside of the theater because we didn't really want it tied to what was taking place in the tower.
Okay.
The tower project was ready to go, everything was ready to go on it, and if we would have pursued the marquee,
That might have
it might
slowed the
have
other
slowed
down.
things down.
Okay.
And at this point, we're ready, at this point, the scaffolding's up, they're ready to do some exploratory surgery to the tower, so to speak, and on schedule to get it reconstructed.
For the benefit of the board, I believe what they arrived at was using some aluminum product for the
The final cap is going to be an
final cap.
aluminum product. Yes.
And based on all the research, historical research that everyone's been able to do, all we can find is it was a general metallic color, and you couldn't really specify the materials, but everything I've seen, what is proposed there is very similar in appearance to what the original was, but the plan is to use aluminum as the material for.
Use a lighter material that was up there.
So that is the plan for that moving forward. But there was some discussions about adding a new marquee sign at the theater, and we were in dialogue with the State Historic Preservation Office before Mr. Berger went on furlough, so I'm
I think
catching
another
up.
thing that was slowing that down a little bit was we weren't the only request from historic theaters across the state that were looking at doing something like
and
that.
they were trying to be consistent.
So they wanted to be consistent and write some policy that would apply to the whole state.
Yeah, because I know there's one in Wichita that they were considering, the Orpheum as well, I think.
The Orpheum has actually done it. They have
Okay.
theirs done.
Okay.
I
So.
think they're trying to kind of dovetail it with that.
So for our other businesses that we don't have a designated schedule for you, but just to be aware that you could get contacted by myself or Margie. If you don't recognize Margie Long's name, don't treat it as spam or anything. She's legit, if she's contacting you. So, we have a couple things going on, and it's just a matter of getting better communication with the State Preservation Office to know that what we need to bring you.
I just wanted to see if there was an update on another issue.
Okay.
The National Park Service was putting together a historical cemetery listing, and they wanted to list our cemetery specifically for August Bondi's gravesite. I had sent all that material to John Berger a few months before the pandemic. Have you heard anything further from the National Park Service on that listing?
So, and just looking at what the minutes say, they say that before a site can be listed, the owner would have to grant consent. And of course, the city owns the Gypsum Hill Cemetery. So, I guess, is it the National Park Service or who?
It was, I believe it was the National Park Service that was putting together
So
this.
I could contact them and try
registry.
to see what form of consent they would need from the city to do that.
Okay. I hope it isn't too late.
Okay. I
you.
will try to get in touch with the National Park Service and see if it's some resolution or some action by the governing body, then we'll see what we can do to get that to happen. If it's just talking to the Parks and Recreation Department that maintains that and
Sure.
getting their permission, then we'll take that route. But
I hope it's not too late to get into the registry.
okay. And what he's referring to is the National Park Service Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Program, and that it's a part of that. So I will follow up with the Park Service and see what they might need from us.
Okay. Could you follow up with an email with?
Sure.
Thank you. I'm John. So-
Anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to know what's happening with St. John's.
Oh, yeah.
And it's another thing, I was pestering Mr. Berger and having him pester. I have not experienced anything like that in the past. We've had a number of properties in Salina that have been gone on the state register and then been placed on the national register, but for some reason, the National Park Service is reluctant to, or hesitant to put the building, the existing hospital building, on the national register, and I think the fact that that listing has not occurred yet and not making it eligible for the federal tax credits is causing the owner not to move forward with anything because they haven't secured the ability to have tax credits yet. And in my experience, there's not been other properties in Salina that have the Lee Building, the Stiefel Theater, the Roosevelt Lincoln Middle School. All of those projects were done with federal and state tax credits. And the way that works is that the federal government has a 25% tax credit, the state of Kansas has a 20% tax credit. When you stack the two together, that's a 45% tax credit that can help put equity into the project. And so combining those two is often the difference between feasible or not feasible. And we've been trying really hard to figure out what. Only thing I know is that every time we think there's going to be a decision, the Park Service asks for more information and more documentation, and that's the last I know. But the reason nothing is happening, I believe, is because we haven't received any information that's been placed on the National Register, and they've indicated to us that they need both the state and federal tax credits to make it viable. And so if you recall, the plan was to tear down all the modern portion of the building and to retain the original 1914 and 1951 portions and redevelop those. But we have just not had any updates on the fact that it has in fact been put on the National Register.
Anything else? That moves us up to the next one, the public forum. Does anybody wish to speak? I don't see anybody. We are adjourned.
Okay. Thank you for all attending today and that we're able to conduct our business. So.
We have with questions. I don't know if you heard it.